Welcome, everybody. This is our first event for Translanguaging series. It is entitled Encouraging Global Research Using First Language Sources in the College Classroom. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Kyunghee Pyun. I'm professor in the Department of History of Art. And my wonderful colleague, Amato, invited me to join this wonderful series, Translanguaging, and I learned a new word, translanguaging. I didn't even know there was a word for it. So the series is to introduce these new ideas to encourage FIT faculty and students to move across multilingual sources when we use both primary and secondary materials. And many faculty members already created classrooms that value students' own knowledge, backgrounds, and experiences, but we simply didn't know what the theory behind it. At least I didn't know, but many people probably, knew about these theories and practices. So I am here to learn from the experts. And Jean, do you want to say hello? My co-host.
Hello, and welcome, and thank you for joining us. We're very excited about our series, and we're tentatively planning an event again where we're also going to be inviting students to join us, and it'll be I think the second week of September is our plan. So this is sort of the beginning of a very important conversation. So we're hoping to keep it rather informal, and we're delighted to have you all.
Yeah, so I'm going to explain the format of this symposium today. So we are going to hear from two experts, Dr. Sara Vogel and Dr. Kate Seltzer. And then we are going to have FIT panelists. Isabella Bertoletti couldn't come because she has some family issues. So we have Mario Valero, professor of modern languages and cultures. And then we have Sara, associate director of the writing studio at FIT. And then we have Jose Diaz, instructional designer of the Office of Online Learning. Let me introduce two speakers today. So I'll introduce both. And then Dr. Sara Vogel is going to present first, and then Kate Seltzer will come the second. So after all these speakers and panelists, we are going to have some group discussions, and you can feel free to add your questions or comments in the chat box, and Jean and I are going to monitor these, and then feed the questions back to the speakers or panelists. It's a small group, so eventually you can all speak out during the discussion time. So Dr. Sara Vogel is born and raised Brooklynite. Yeah, born and raised in Brooklyn, popular neighborhood, a digital media and bilingual educator and education researcher who focuses on the intersection of bilingual, social justice, and computing education. She's currently a postdoctoral associate at New York University with a National Science Foundation funded project. It is called Participating in Literacies and Computer Science, which supports bilingual students to participate in computer science for all initiatives. She was formerly a research assistant for the Kyunghee New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals, where she developed teaching bilinguals, even if you are not one, a video web series for K-12 educators. She has worked as a teacher educator at institutions such as Hunter College, Bank Street College, guiding pre- and in-service educators to reflect on theory, research, and practice of bilingual education. She has a PhD in urban education from the Kyunghee Graduate Center and earned her master's degree from Hunter College, Kyunghee, in childhood education with a bilingual extension. And also our second speaker, Kate Seltzer, is an assistant professor of bilingual and ESL education at Rowan University, whose overarching research goal is to help schools and teachers build on students' rich language practices while also disrupting their own ideologies about these students and their ways of using language. A former high school English language art teacher in New York City, Dr. Seltzer currently teaches pre- and in-service teachers of bilingual students. She's a co-author of the book, The Translanguaging Classroom, Leveraging Student Bilingualism for Learning, as well as several book chapters and articles in journals such as English Education, Research in the Teaching of English, and TESOL Quarterly. So let's welcome our speakers and start with Dr. Sara Vogel. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Kyunghee, and also to Jean for inviting us both here to speak to you all at FIT, which would be really close by if we were in person, but today I guess we're going to do this virtually. And I'm just going to share my screen. I have some slides. I feel like in the digital world, my attention span has kind of gone down, and so when people talk next to slides, it's just really helpful for my own following. So I have some visuals for us. I'm excited to also be here with all the panelists who've been thinking about multilingualism in their classrooms, and I'm excited to hear what you all have come up with and to learn from you. And those of us who work in multilingual education settings, we know all of the challenges that face us in doing this work. And I hope to, by the end of this talk, kind of mention some of the strategies and solutions that I've seen teachers implement and the approaches that they have. But I wanted to kick my part of this talk off by helping us unpack the problems that we think we're trying to solve. Because as those of you who also might be designers know, that you come up with different solutions depending on what problem you think you're trying to solve. So to start there, historically and even today in language education and bilingualism, in our bilingual fields, educators and researchers, a lot of us, especially those who are white, who are English speaking, might have located problems in our multilingual students, often racialized students and their families. And the problem was seen as like, oh, the way those students speak, right? Those children don't speak English, or they face barriers, or they're labeled as language minority children. Even in federal documents, up until 2015, we were labeling students, children in our school system as limited. We were calling them limited English proficient at the federal level. And so defining the problem in this way has ignored all of the rich ways that these students actually communicate, and has led to a lot of harmful pedagogical practices, ranging from forcing Native and Indigenous children into boarding schools, assimilating them to English, assimilating them to white culture, punishing children for speaking languages other than English, and also more subtly oppressive practices like English standard tests, or teaching children or telling children that they have to leave one piece of them at home, one kind of language for home, one kind of language for school, and you have to leave pieces of yourself at the classroom door. So this slide is from the project that Kyunghee mentioned that I work on, which is participating in literacies and computer science, where we think about how do we actually encourage these students to bring their whole selves to the classroom. And that's something that, as we think about your context, that I know both Kate and I hope that you'll think about, is how are you defining the problem, so that you can design solutions that really leverage your students' language backgrounds as resources. So a lot of this thinking comes out of work, as I mentioned, from the project that I just said, as well as from the project CUNY NYSEB, the City University of New York's initiative on emergent bilinguals. And we'll give you access to these slides after, so you can click into the resources from these projects, which include guides and include videos and all kinds of great stuff. But as we kind of define the problem in our project, it's systems, not the students, that need to change. So bilingualism might not be the norm in many parts of the US, but it's the norm around our world, and it's probably the norm at FIT. I would imagine most of you have, the majority of your students are multilingual, or many of them. And if we view multilingual students for only their capacity to learn English, our systems kind of cut them off from full participation. So our projects, both of these projects, think about how we build on those students' cultures and languages. So I'm going to quote Kate, who you're going to hear from in a minute, but she asked the question, what would it mean to realign schools along the communication practices of our students and communities? And so I heard, or we heard from Jean and Kyunghee, that you're working with translanguaging theory as a potential way of starting to think about solutions to these issues. And so I thought maybe I'd talk through translanguaging theory. I find that it's like, you never get it the first time. Sometimes you get it the second time. It takes a lot of trial and error to really understand translanguaging theory because it rocks to our core what we think of as language. Like even in the phrasing of this event, it's like using first language, I think was the title of this session, like using students' first language in the classroom. Translanguaging would actually question the notion of the first language in general. And so I'll talk a little bit about why that is and how that is. And to understand translanguaging, it's helpful to know about the notions of language that it sought to push back against. So many people, when they think of language, they might think about named languages like Spanish and French and English. And in this view, language exists as this thing, like a dictionary kind of outside of us, and it's our job to acquire that thing. And there are standards for these languages. And in order to quote unquote speak well, we have to measure up to those standards. And even though this is pretty obvious to a lot of us, or very commonplace, I should say, sort of this assumption that's embedded in there is like, why is there a standard language? And who gets to decide what that standard language even is? So, you know, I have this, oh, the GIF isn't working, but it's fun. Who gets to decide what the language, what language standards really are? And there's a great quote from a scholar, Max Ulrich Weinreich, who says, a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. And Dr. Fede Garcia, who was one of the kind of founding members and PIs of the Kyunghee NICEB project, uses this quote in her book. And she talks about how power has played a really key role in defining what counts as speaking well or as standard language. And languages were really invented in the colonial times as Europeans colonized the Americas and Africa and Asia. They kind of gave names to all of these places and peoples and languages that they were finding, and then called the ways that people spoke primitive in comparison to their own European languages. And so starting in this era, you get codification, standardization, and a sense that language isn't just something you use, but something that exists in these boxes. Like this is English, this is Spanish, and that you can kind of count and draw boxes around these languages. But this way of thinking about language can exclude a lot of people. And even I, who I'm never been oppressed because of my language use, especially as a white person, people will recognize what I say as standard English. But when I speak Spanish, for instance, I still feel like, oh, I'm not going to measure up to this monolingual ideal. My Spanish will never be perfect. It'll never be like the native speaker. And you know, when we constantly compare ourselves, right, you can feel like you're being judged for your language use. And maybe some of you can even identify with that idea. So can we actually break out of this confining definition of language? And that constantly compares how people speak to standards. And translanguaging seeks to do that. We can view language another way, not as a thing like English, Spanish, French in a dictionary, but as a practice. Language as communicating, as expressing. And if we take up this view, we center not the name of the language, but how people use language day to day in their lives. And so translanguaging takes up this idea that language is a practice, it's a verb, languaging. And it says bilinguals are not of two minds with something called English over here and something called Mandarin over there, but they actually have a single repertoire of features, words, sounds, gestures, ways they dress, ways they act. And then we as speakers actually pull from this repertoire in order to make meaning and to express ourselves and communicate. And even if society will come in and label things that we say or do as Spanish, as Chinese, or as English, these are all part of the ways that we communicate. And it's really up to us to leverage those strategically. So in a nutshell, translanguaging is what bilinguals do when they deploy features from their full repertoire to make meaning, regardless of societal categories and conventions. So we can see this at work in this picture, where the student is saying, this is my favorite book because, and then writes some piece of it in Chinese, and you see the drawing there. It's a full, complete expression. And translanguaging likely is always happening in your classrooms. Kate will talk more about this, but translanguaging is sort of akin to a river. Like there's constantly language flowing in your classroom, and it's up to teachers to kind of channel that flow. And that's what we'd call translanguaging pedagogy. Building on our repertoires for learning is what teachers can help us do. So I know I talked really fast through a lot of things, but I think it'll help make it concrete to see an example of this from an actual teacher. So I'm just going to share the video. Okay. And so as you watch this video, which I'll show a piece of it, you can think about how this teacher's mindsets and strategies and translanguaging strategies might be helpful in your classrooms. And I think Kate will kind of dive into it a little bit deeper with us. So here we go.
Currently, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, which is one of my favorite books, and I think it's a great book to teach this population of students. And one of my favorite quotes from this book is, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb in his skin and walk around in it. And I think that's what it's all about. I think as a middle school teacher, it's all about empathy.
Welcome back to Teaching Bilinguals, even if you're not one. I'm Sara Vogel, a research assistant with the Kyunghee, New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals. Today, I'm here at Ebbets Field Middle School, an exceptionally diverse school in Brooklyn, New York. On any given day, you can hear students speaking Haitian Creole, English, Spanish, Arabic, and 2 dialects of Fulani. Ms. Shireen Chapman-Santiago is an 8th grade English teacher here. And she truly lives by that philosophy from To Kill a Mockingbird, that you have to know students well in order to teach them. But how can you truly crawl into your students' skin if you don't share their language practices? In this episode, we're going to find out how she does it.
I think the quote really inspires me to dive deep and understand who the student is, and not just, a name on a roster, but who is that person, and build a relationship.
Let's get into Ms. Chapman-Santiago's tips for building relationships with her bilingual students. Tip 1. Ms. Chapman-Santiago is a keen observer of her students' expressions and behavior.
First and foremost, cues, body language. When you give them something and they're just like, they delve into it, or they kind of just like look around. So I always look at those things. I think I'm a mother first, right? So I'm very in tune to their emotions because they are teenagers and they're very dramatic. And so when they come in with that face, I'm not going to continue with the lesson. I'll direct the students to do something and I'll pull them out in a whole other conversation. If we don't speak the same language, I'll pull out my phone, I'll type the question, give it to them, they'll respond. And I've literally had conversations like that and uncovered some really deep and personal things that actually helped me deal with the students accordingly.
Tip 2. When it comes to academics, Ms. Chapman-Santiago provides opportunities for students to show what they know using home language practices. That way, she can see their strengths and their challenges.
The starting points vary from child to child. So even if you have 3 kids from Yemen, one may have had like some very advanced education, some may not because they're from the rural part. Those that are more proficient have an easier time making the transition from their language to English, while those maybe with formerly interrupted education, may need more interventions. I don't know the languages of the room, but I look at their work and I can infer where they are and modify accordingly. If I gave her the prompt in Arabic and she only wrote 2 lines, then I start wondering, is she proficient in Arabic? And then I'll compare it to her counterpart who'll have a full page. And then I'm like, maybe I'll need to give her a little sentence starter or a little bit more background. In the beginning of the year, January, she started out with just 2 lines.
And then what do we see kind of later in the year with your supports? She's sort of writing
she's writing more in Arabic, but it's half a page now. And then she's now attempting to write in English. And even though it's 2 lines, it's a victory for me. But today's entry was awesome. Where is it? It says, I wear my hijab. I don't know what that says. With my Islamic clothes, which makes me glamorous. And I was like, yes, you are glamorous.
Tip 3. Based on her observations, Ms. Chapman-Santiago creates scaffolds that draw on students' home language practices. Students who are literate in home languages benefit from translated copies of texts and prompts, like this exit slip. While students complete this assignment, they can talk to a partner using whatever language they'd like to ensure they understand what's being asked of them. In the end, they must answer the question in English so Ms. Chapman can see how they progress on specific language objectives.
Google Translate is always open. And then where I can, I have students also help. And I'll send things home to like older sisters or parents for feedback, and it's just right. But it is a challenge, I'm not gonna lie. It's a lot of work, but it's necessary if you want everybody to succeed.
To recap, Ms. Chapman-Santiago.
Okay, stop it there. So I know this is a K-12 example, and you're in very different contexts, but I would be interested, once we open it up for the Q&A after this, to hear from you and think, are there any mindsets, are there any strategies or ways of thinking that you would bring to your own practice? I think it's something to sort of close out my portion of this talk today is to encourage us to remember our students are holistic bilinguals with complex identities. And if we focus on them as not just English learners or English limited students, right, we can help them really deepen their learning and their experiences in our classroom. So I'm going to leave it there and pass it to Kate, who's going to deepen our thinking on a lot of this.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Really great to be here with you this afternoon. I'm Kate Seltzer. I'm an assistant professor of ESL and bilingual education at Rowan University, a friendly neighbor of yours to the south in South Jersey, right outside Philly. So FIT is not super close for me as it is for Sarah. So I'm actually really glad to be here virtually because I can be here with you very easily. So I'm going to build on the wonderful historicizing intro, that Sarah laid out around sort of the theory and the way that translanguaging is responding to traditional notions of what constitutes language and particularly what we call standard language. And if Sarah, you can go ahead and reshare the presentation. I'm going to start by just returning to a concept from our book, The Translanguaging Classroom, that Sarah referred to. So Sarah, this is slide 26. There you go, great. And this is the image of the corriente, right, or a current. And in the book we say, that this corriente refers to the diverse, fluid language and cultural practices that flow through classrooms, even when invisible. We thought about how in a river, even when a river looks very placid, looks like it's hardly moving, all you have to do is stick your hand in to feel the rush of water that is sometimes occurring far enough below the surface that it doesn't ripple where we can see it. And we thought about that in terms of the way that our classrooms, if there are bilingual students present, there is this corriente of language and translanguaging that is always present. And we thought about, well, what would it look like if classrooms were designed to make that corriente more visible and audible, and were leveraged in learning, right? If it's always happening, what are we missing by not leveraging it? And so that's really very much at the heart of what we call a translanguaging pedagogy. And Sara, you can move to the next slide. And so when we were thinking in the book about the purposes, right? Why go with the flow of a corriente, right? Why tap into this thing that is sometimes rendered invisible in our classrooms? We came up with 4 purposes for the use of translanguaging, why a translanguaging perspective is so important. First, it supports students as they engage with and comprehend complex content and texts. 2, it provides opportunities for students to develop linguistic practices for academic contexts. It gives them something to hang new language on, right, when we leverage their existing language practices. 3, it makes space for students' bilingualism and bilingual ways of knowing. This idea that bilingual students come to the classroom, come to the content with very unique sensibilities, what I've called translingual sensibilities that shape their views of the world. And we miss something when we don't leverage those in the classroom as well. And lastly, we say that a translanguaging perspective helps us as educators to support bilingual students' socio-emotional development and bilingual identities. And when we were talking about this workshop, we were thinking about how, we thought about these in a K-12 context, but we really see these as purposes that would extend to any context where bilingual people are learning. And so we were thinking about this idea of FIT in this context where, you are really delving into the worlds of art and design and business. These are not monolingual worlds. They're not monocultural worlds. They're highly translingual and transcultural. And so, if you at FIT are preparing students to enter into these kinds of worlds, why wouldn't we think about language and the way that language is being taken up in these worlds? You're pushing all sorts of boundaries over at FIT, so why wouldn't language be one of them? So that's something I hope, between now and September, when you gather again, thinking about what the purposes for translanguaging might be in the FIT context in your particular classrooms is something we hope you'll think a little bit about. So you can go forward, Sara. So when we lay out what we term a translanguaging pedagogy, which aims to, as Sara alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, this idea of aligning classrooms more with the language practices of students and communities than with standard named languages, we lay out 3 strands of this way of taking up translanguaging in the classroom. We talk about the translanguaging stance, which is the ideological system or set of beliefs that informs teachers' approaches to teaching emergent bilinguals. We talk about the translanguaging design, which is the design of the classroom space, the physical space. What in CUNY NYSIB we talk a lot about is the multilingual ecology of a space, the way that languages are or are not visible, audible, palpable. The design refers to instruction and assessment that aligns with and emerges from a translanguaging stance and leverages that translanguaging corriente. And lastly, the 3rd strand are the translanguaging shifts. And these are unplanned moves within a translanguaging design that respond to that corriente, go with the flow of that corriente, and to students' needs, interests, and connections. You can go forward. And so since you got to see Shireen in the wonderful video series that Sara produced, and there are 5 episodes and they're all fantastic. I would really encourage you to check them out. You can really see how she integrates these 3 strands in her own teaching. So we see her stance, We see, Sarah, you can go forward one. We see the importance of building relationships with her bilingual students. We see the importance of using students' home languages juntos, or together with English, right? That is very much reflected in her design. You can go forward, Sarah. Right, she gives students the opportunities to show what they know and can do in their home languages and in English. She uses students' home language performances to inform differentiated instruction and scaffolding. Even if she doesn't understand students' home languages, she does this. And lastly, I really think this video does a great job of demonstrating shifts, right? Shireen talks about how she looks for her students' cues during a lesson and shifts based on those cues. She uses translation apps and dictionaries. I love the way she uses her phone to, engage in deep conversations with students that may not be possible with the use of other resources. And she makes inferences based on students' work, even again, if she doesn't understand what that work says, right? And we saw that reflected in the example with the Arabic speaking and writing student, right? Using that language, even if she doesn't know it, to help her inform her instruction. So just a little snapshot of how these three strands of a translanguaging pedagogy can manifest in the practice of teachers. So I'm going to show you a couple of more examples that I hope will apply to your context in the college classroom. I'm going to share an example on this slide in a second of a translanguaging design from a high school literacy classroom. These are 11th graders, so not too far off from some of the students that you're working with over at FIT. And I'm also going to share with you some language policy statements that I think are great starting points for operationalizing a translanguaging stance and inviting translanguaging designs and shifts in college classrooms. So here we are in Miss Winter's high school ELA classroom in the Bronx. And this is a teacher I worked with intensively for a year. And actually the project, the little activity mini unit I'm going to be talking to you about, I write about, and I just linked you here. Well, I actually haven't linked you, but I cite here, and I can link you to an article that I recently published in the Journal of Language Identity and Education on this particular poetry writing activity. So just to give you some background, Miss Winter is a English-speaking monolingual white woman, but she is explicitly committed to growing her anti-racist translanguaging stance and to creating language and literacy designs that emerge from that stance. All of Miss Winter's students are students of color, almost all of whom identify as Black and Latinx. There are many emergent bilinguals, and so she works with an ESL teacher as well. But because she participated in that Kyunghee NYSIB project, Miss Winter, she has already thought a lot about how her quote unquote mainstream English classroom, right? So this is a classroom that has both bilingual and quote unquote monolingual students, how she can adapt her instruction overall for these students who are learning together. So in this poetry activity, Miss Winter first showed students a video, and you can see a screenshot of it here, of the poet Melissa Losada Oliva performing a spoken word poem called My Spanish. And there's an excerpt here I won't read, but you can take a look at it. Here's an excerpt from her poem that sort of gives you a sense of what it's about. And this poem served as a model for students' own poems about their languages and their complex feelings about those languages, right? Their sophisticated understandings of those languages. And here are just a few excerpts. This one here says, my English is good enough, yet mi inglés a veces se cambia. It's okay, you'll get the idea. No es muy complicado. Understand? No? Okay, doesn't matter. You can go forward one, Sarah. I'll read like maybe one or two more. My English has styles from all over the world. My English can adapt to where it's at. My English is as smart as a scientist. My English changes every day. It's alive just as you're alive. It grows like an infant. It has a temper like a teenager. And maybe we'll do one more. Yeah, this is a good one. My English can dance bachata with Spanish. My English is all over the place, bouncing off the walls. There are different versions to my English. So what I think you see here in these excerpts, in these really beautiful translingual compositions, are their writing practices and also those sensibilities, right? Those bilingual ways of knowing, those translingual ways of knowing, their pride in their language practices that transcend these notions of standard or native speakers, right? So I think when we invite students into these practices, even in our quote unquote mainstream English medium classrooms, really beautiful practices can emerge. So you can go forward, Sara. Moving into what I'll call translingual language policy statements. I have two. I have one from a friend of mine, Dr. Sara Alvarez, who is a composition and rhetoric instructor, assistant professor at Queens College, so right nearby. And this is the syllabus, this is a statement she includes in her syllabus. The ability to communicate in multiple languages, including varieties of English, is a valuable asset, and you're encouraged to draw upon these linguistic and cultural resources in this course. Although we will employ Englishes and edited written Englishes for many situations, you may choose to use other languages and rhetorical practices in particular assignments. Just remember to consider audience, purpose, and rhetorical appeals. For instance, if most of your audience does not speak Queen's English, you may need to include a translation or captions. For example, if an image has certain connotations in your culture, you should provide adequate information so that your message effectively reaches your target audience. Right, so you really see here an explicit flexibility laid out in this particular language policy. And this is in a first-year writing course, right? These are, and you know, for those of you who know the context at Queens College, highly linguistically diverse. You know, and I think there is usually in these highly diverse language contexts a kind of fear around just how much linguistic diversity there might be, and will that cause chaos, you know? And I think, you know, what Sara, Dr. Alvarez has done is really lay out her translanguaging stance here, right? It is right here for her students to read in the syllabus, but it also lays out how her writing assignments that she will include in this course are in fact translanguaging designs, right? That invite students' diverse languaging, and it supports her in the moment responses to the classroom discourse, and it really shapes the way she gives students feedback, right? So this stance statement trickles down into all of the other instruction and assessment that Dr. Alvarez does in the classroom. You can go one forward. I'll go to my last slide here. So this is actually the part of our Rowan University Writing Arts first year writing programs statement. And I'll read it really quickly. Rowan's first year writing program affirms linguistic diversity as a strength. We seek to empower our students by recognizing and developing this rhetorical resource in their written expression. We understand that the discourse community of the Academy reinforces white supremacy by focusing on standard or academic English to the exclusion of linguistic diversity. We aim to make these power dynamics visible for our students so that they make conscious choices about when to push back against genre conventions and when to strategically deploy diverse Englishes in their writing. Faculty are encouraged to establish instructional and assessment practices that incorporate anti-racist pedagogy and affirm linguistic diversity. The core values and outcomes detail our curricular priorities and should serve as a guide for faculty rather than any culturally constructed notions of what quote unquote good writing looks like or a sense of obligation to the institution. So, you know, I'm really proud to be at an institution that has this as their explicit statement of stance in the first year writing program. You know, and these are students for whom their experiences with writing are often marked by stigma, right? By being told that they're not good writers. So what kinds of practices might this kind of a statement in an entire program invite, right? And what possibilities might emerge? So just, you know, some questions I hope that this might everything that you've heard today might get you thinking about, and thinking about where you want to go from here, thinking about where you want to be in September when hopefully we would meet again, is, do you see elements of a translanguaging approach reflected in your own context already? What are the purposes, and I alluded to this before, for translanguaging in your own classroom and at FIT more broadly? And could you see a translanguaging approach being extended at FIT, right? Even moving past what we've done with it thus far. That would be the goal, So one more slide for us, which is just a few resources we hope you'll check out. I have a couple of screenshots from free guides that are available on the CUNY NYSIB website. We have the original Translanguaging guide that I co-wrote with Christina Selleck. We have a writing guide that Sara Vogel is one of the co-authors of that I think is really, really beneficial, particularly for those of us at the college level as well. We have some great videos of webinars from Ofelia Garcia, of course, the Teaching Bilinguals, even if you're not one, web series. And then, this is unfortunately not free, but the Translanguaging Classroom book, very much builds on a lot of the work that went on in CUNY NYSIB that really was brought into being by Ofelia Garcia. She's the first author of that book, and we really apply translanguaging theory to the classroom. It is a K-12 context, but I think there's much that can be taken from it and brought into the college context as well. So really want to thank you for your time. Really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists, but thank you for your attention. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for our speakers today. I've learned so much, and I've written like 4 pages of my handwritten notes, and I want to learn. I want to incorporate that. What is it? Translanguaging policy, right? As a part of a syllabus. I think it will be really wonderful. So why don't we then go to our FIT people, right, Jean?
Absolutely. And why don't we, let's see, are we starting with, I think, Mario Valero? Would you like to take the microphone?
Hola a todos, talking about translanguaging. I'm fascinated with your, thank you very much, with so much insight in such a few minutes, and I feel one of your devoted followers. Intuitively, I've been teaching for over 25 years Spanish in different places with different type of people and levels, from all adults, Americans or Hispanic heritage, to my actual semester. Now I'm teaching a course called Spanish for Spanish speakers, and that course is my challenge and my love too, I would say here, because as an immigrant myself, I've been here for 32 years, but I still feel like I arrived yesterday. It's a challenge, right? And I always remember the first time I taught this course at Columbia University as a graduate student over 20 years ago. My students at the first day of classes usually ask them, "What are you taking this course, Spanish for Spanish speakers?" And it was common to hear, "Because I speak bad Spanish," or "Because I write wrong Spanish," or "Because I don't know the grammar." And I feel very frustrated, really. And choose I'm going to be talking about most anecdotally, because I cannot theorize about, but rather show you my experience. And I remember putting together my past. I remember that in Instituto Cervantes once, one of my students, an American, very, very good student in grammar, came with an edition of El Quijote, and was asking me why she couldn't understand a word or almost anything of what was written in one of the pages. And that made me think about it. So you know what I did? I make a copy of one passage that I particularly love in Cervantes, in El Quijote, when he finds the manuscript of El Quijote, actually. I'm not going to go into that. And I put it in front of my students from those Spanish for Spanish speaking courses. And I said, okay, if you think you're speaking wrongly, try to read the right Spanish here. I don't even know what it means either, like you do. I am the teacher and I cannot, because it's a language that is alive. Cervantes created a magnificent work that it will go over centuries, but it has nothing to do in terms of the language with us. It has to do in terms of the essence, yes, but not the language. And then I said, okay, so what do you think is, I spent the entire first class saying, what do you think is the norm for Spanish? Madrid. On purpose, I put a video of a Madrid young fellow teaching Madrillian I don't understand a word. And probably one of my colleagues here, Saida, who is from Seville, will say, probably agree with me, because every big city has a jargon. So my point is, I try to emphasize all the time, it's not only in this class, the Spanish for Spanish speakers, that there is not a norm. So there's not a way to speak wrongly. Or, professor, why my art is soft? If I come from, my parents are from Puerto Rico, I said, because it's a dialect, millions of people, even the more refined scholar in Puerto Rico will use the soft art because it's the way millions of people do. Or in Dominican Republic, they put an S where they don't go. According to the normative, that's wrong, but 8 million people cannot be wrong. My point is, there is not only linguistic elements, but also meta-linguistic elements in this appreciation. And one of the activities, unfortunately, I don't know if I can share with you, I do with my students this year is to choose your favorite Anglicism or your favorite word. So in Spanish, they are saying, oh, what do you prefer to say? Feedback or retroalimentación? Oh my God, retroalimentación is even a riddle in your mouth. So just to give you an anecdote, how my approach intuitively has to do with not privileging any normative. One of the obstacles that I find is that, and I think is the great work that Sara and Kate are doing, is that in high school, you need to work hard with them because they tend to be very normative and prescriptive with the language, especially Spanish, because we have the Royal Academy of Languages. It's my first forbidden rule in my courses: do not look at the right dictionary, because that's a cemetery. And they only find dead words there and power. You say something that touched me deeply. Language is power, and they know it as immigrants and some of them more than anyone else, what power means, of integration, of being integrated. So I made them, you have the power. You are the ones who keep alive the dictionary. The dictionary there is just dead, but you are the ones that are really keeping it alive. And so anyway, these are just, I wish I could share. I don't see if I can share here. No, I can. For some reason, maybe if Jean makes me a participant, I will be able to share one of my my activities. But anyway, nothing. I can just describe it to you. I said, okay, let's choose. I showed in a group of what we call calcos linguísticos, so words that are good friends that you can really use in Spanish and in variety and so on, to Anglicism and to Spanglish. I remember still, and for me, it touched my heart. 20 years ago at Columbia Secretariat, we heard this, oh, English is taking over Spanish. It's not Spanglish, it's wrong. That you see all these big names questioning most of them. And it was even a controversy. Thanks God that changed, and now we have translanguaging, seems like it's in the past. And Spanglish, welcome. I know, I'm going to say the downside of my approach that I always, as a personal instructor, find that is grading. Because one activity that really measure how much a student that Kate put it so nicely in her activity that she was showing, you can really assess the student's progress in writing and speaking. That's what we need more now: instrument tools, people like you really doing work in theory and to really to move forward in this, which I totally welcome, because it's a liberating, for me, it's a liberating activity. It's a liberating translanguaging. It should be liberating, put the comma, liberating us for the the limitations of that power through language imposed on us. Anyway, it's just very anecdotal, and I wanted to share with you an activity, but If I can, it's fine.
Mario, you can share. I made you, you know, presenter.
Oh, now, okay. So
Oh.
let me see. Now it's me.
Yeah.
But I can show you quickly the, let me
The
see.
share button in the middle.
Yeah, in the, and I use so usually the share. Let me see.
You have a mute. Stop it. Okay. Now I see your screen.
You can see it? Oh, can you see now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what I do is I create these that Jose is not here, but I use Padlets to do activities in class, or I prepare them before the class. And what I do here is I give them a model of what to, you know, I give them, okay, this is a list from Spain of let's say Anglicismos and Spanish, you know, calcos, pick your favorite one. Once the one has been, because they say, oh, this has been accepted by the academy, they have not been accepted yet. So they have to choose. And I love that because the students go and pick 3, 4, 5 different numbers of words that are either Spanglish or calcos or good friends or cognates or Anglicisms. And we then everybody has to sort of talk during class with other students, agreeing which ones do they like, which one they don't like. For instance, just to give you one here, Emilia Whithold, which is a wonderful student. She's Chinese, grew up in Sweden with a Swedish mother, and speaks English and speaks a beautiful Spanish. And something I must say that really calls my attention in this class, Spanish for a Spanish speaker, they want to comply more with the rules are the non-heritage speakers, because I welcome in my class, there are not only Spanish speakers, I mean, heritage, there are also Americans and from other languages, and they are the more like tend to follow the rule. And that's for me is fascinating, discovering that sometimes they even are better than the native in a sense that they are more still, you know, contrived by the rules rather than the natives are much more freer. But Emilia, for instance, said, I prefer lunch because when I was in high school, all my professors used to say, let's have lunch. So it's great that she reflects that the ones who were teaching them almuerzo, they were saying, let's have lunch. So you see that she can take out of the class, as Sara and Kay were saying, the experience or show or anywhere. I don't want to go into details, but you saw all these students have tons and tons of you know, comments, all in Spanish. So I don't want to, but this is an exercise exactly in that, how to deal metalinguistically with their own bilingualism or multilingualism in that case, and being conscious that there's not a perspective there. I'm not telling that's wrong. Don't say lunch, say almuerzo. So I think it's a great experience, and I'm going to choose deepen these, you know, these practices because I think are great, and I'm looking forward to hear more from Kate and Sara. Anyway, enough taking time, and I just want to stop sharing, and you go back to. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Sara and Kate, for the wonderful insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. I mean, I wish your Padlet is a little bit larger so I can actually see, you know, what's written on it.
Oh, I'm sorry
maybe
about
you can share, share like a Padlet link with us. And now let's go to Sara Blazer, the Associate Director of the FIT Writing and Speaking Studio.
Thank you. Kyunghee, could you make me a co-host as well so I can share something? And before I do that, I just wanted to say also that I watched some of the videos in the series teaching multilingual students, even if you aren't one, even if you aren't. And I think something like that for FIT would be really wonderful, especially something that spoke to faculty across the college, not just those of us in modern languages and cultures and English and communication studies. So anyway, I loved the series. I thought it was great. Those short little bits really illustrating practice are, you know, enormously helpful and motivating because in my experience, when we are trying to present an alternative like this that really rocks people to their core, which, you know, I think a lot of this stuff does, if you can't talk with them about what else they can do, then it really does feel like, you know, you're feeding them a line, you know, like that it's not really possible. And so this is a lot of the work that we do in the writing and speaking studio, and I wasn't sure whether to talk about this, but since you, Kate, were really emphasizing this idea of stance and really articulating stance clearly and publicly, I did want to share with you the Writing and Speaking Studio's clause on translingual perspective. It's part of our code of ethics, and I'm going to share that with you now. So if you'll just give me just a moment. And actually, Kyunghee, India, who is your assistant and was on the call initially, is the person responsible for designing this beautiful document. Oops, that's not the right one. Hold on. So a shout out to her, and we have another one of our consultants who did the illustration work.
So Sarah, you can share, right? You see the share button?
Yeah, I'm just a little slow. I'm working on it though.
Oh,
here we go.
Yeah, I see it. Okay.
Okay, so people can see. This is the Writing and Speaking Studio Code of Ethics. And I'll just draw our attention to clause 2. And if you don't mind, I'll just read it out loud briefly. We're committed to educating ourselves about anti-racism, social justice, and translingual pedagogies, so that our practice reflects an appreciation of and respect for different cultures, dialects, accents, and regional colloquialisms and vernaculars in order to help end discrimination in educational spaces and decolonize academia in regards to literacy and speech. And because this document is really meant for anyone and everyone who's willing to look at it, we worked on glossing each clause so that we would provide our sort of working ideas about these terms, pedagogies, colloquialism, vernaculars, and decolonization, because obviously these things are a little heady, and we wanted to make sure it was clear what we meant by these terms. And so this is the stance, right? And then the practice obviously is even more important, right? We can articulate a stance like this in our syllabus, in our program documents, but then we have to work on enacting it. And so a lot of the work that we do in the studio is trying to get our tutors, most of whom are FIT undergraduate students, to figure out, what does this look like? What does it look like in the little moments in the sessions that you have with writers and speakers? What does it look like to take a translingual stance and to practice from a translingual perspective? And so we do break it down into practices that people can use, but then we're trying to get them to talk about what happens when you try it. Sometimes it doesn't go well, sometimes it's beautiful. The examples that you see here are the beautiful ones, are the ones that worked out. And the point of a document like this is to really help share with people, this is what's possible in our space. This is what we're trying to do with writers and speakers, to open up space for people to think fully with all of that, cultural and linguistic repertoire that they bring to writing and speaking and communication situations. So, Kate, I don't know. Let me think about it. I'm sorry. I'll try to, I'll share it with everyone, but I've got to think about the best way to do that. It's not published on the FIT website because they won't publish it. So I have to find another way to get it out to everybody. But I'll just read a quick example. These were written by tutors. And I think that's really important to emphasize. So Kevin and Joanna were generating ideas for his graphic design analysis paper. In the last paragraph, Kevin had to describe his reaction to the artwork. Kevin, an international student from Japan, wanted to use the Japanese term yugen, sorry if I mispronounced that, but did not know how to describe the word in English. Kevin and Joanna talked about what the word meant in Japanese and looked for a synonym in English. There was none. Yugen means a profound, mysterious sense of the beauty of the universe and the sad beauty of human suffering. Joanna asked Kevin if he would consider teaching his audience the Japanese term. And I'm thinking of Sarah Alvarez's statement, right, and her support of students glossing their texts for people. Kevin decided to keep the term in his paper to describe his reaction and expanded on why he had this reaction by referencing techniques in the artwork. And this is just to show an example of what is possible when we're talking with writers and speakers about the choices that they have in their work. And I also want to acknowledge that it doesn't always go this way, right? Oftentimes students don't have any interest in this kind of conversation. And I think that's because they've been told again and again that, you know, you need to leave that language, that practice, that piece of your cultural identity over there. And so I think that it's really important that we really kind of work to infuse the entire college with this kind of thinking, if possible, so that more people are willing to engage in this work with us. We've definitely had tutors talk to us about trying to say, for example, if a student is stuck and they're struggling to articulate what they're trying to get into writing, and a tutor will say, well, just try in Korean, right? We have many students who come to us who are from Korea, and we'll say, just try in Korean, just talk out loud for a minute in Korean. And the student might say, well, you know, are you gonna know what I'm talking about? and the tutor may or may not say, well, let's say they won't understand it, right? That's frequently the situation. And the student's very hesitant to do that because they're thinking, what's this gonna do? What purpose will this serve? But going back to the, you know, points already raised, it serves quite a lot of purpose. And it often will free up a person's thinking and then allow them to return to a conversation in English, which is the language they're needing to use for the work that they're doing. And it's like some progress is then made. But again, some students, and Brian Fallon and I have written about this in an article we published in last year, some students are really resistant to this. And so we're trying to, you know, this is always, it's always part of the challenge is we might be open to it and wanting to generate possibility. Students might not respond. So I wanted to say too that I think, and actually I'll stop sharing. Okay. I think there's a lot we can do with our colleagues across the college to create conversation about little things we can do in our practice that open up space. I think that this feels very overwhelming and daunting to people. And I just don't think it has to be. I think there are lots of little things that we can do, changes to the way that we talk about our expectations, syllabus statements, tweaks to our rubrics, de-emphasizing correctness. These are things that we can all practice if we choose to. And I think it goes a long way to supporting writers and speakers to bring their full selves to the work that they're doing and not be so constrained in their thinking and trying to jump through hoops they can't quite even always identify. And so one of the things I'd love to see at FIT is a discussion across the college about our rubrics and about and maybe a questioning of, you know, including things like an area for correctness in a course that's not dealing with, it's not teaching anything about, you know, language, but students are being assessed for that in that area. So I think that that's just one little thing that we could talk about at FIT that could go a long way. And I also just final point want to speak to what Mario was bringing up about assessment and how difficult assessment is when we really open up our open up our expectations and invite lots of different, all the students' language resources into the work, the products, not just the process, but the products. I think part of it is, this isn't an easy answer, but I feel like part of the answer is in focusing on revision and asking students to talk about how they revised a piece and why they chose to revise certain things, being able to explain their decisions. And I think when we see students revising and articulating their thinking about their revisions, we should be able to place a lot of value in that in terms of what they've been able to accomplish in our classes. So thank you. Thanks for inviting me to participate. And I'd love to hear more from, I know that there's a book referenced in that last slide that's more specific to college teaching around translanguaging. So I'd love to hear more from Kate and Sara about things that they do in the college level classrooms.
So thank you so much, Sara. So from now on, Jean is going to moderate our conversation. So if you want to jump in to the conversation, then you can like unmute yourself and talk, or so Jean, you can lead from here.
Okay, and if you have questions, everyone, please type them into the chat also. I wanted to just thank everyone for just a very exciting conversation, and we're all scribbling ideas and getting inspired, I'm sure, as we sit here. I wanted to sort of build on what Sara spoke about and then link it back to what came up earlier. And I think the idea that of the multilingual ecology of a space and that translanguaging is a verb, I think they're really important concepts that kind of tie into what Sara was raising too, is how to get our students to feel comfortable and how to get faculty to feel comfortable, especially important aspect here too, because a lot of faculty, the last time I presented on this, said, well, that's great. If you speak Chinese, you're comfortable with that, but what about other languages? And that discomfort and that shift in the hierarchy of not just language but the educational system. And I think the idea that Sara raises a really key point too that ties in so well with our speakers, is that idea that you really do have to start small. You have to start with, and they sample from the syllabi, creating an environment from the very first day of class where students are empowered, where every week they come in with assignments and they are told from the beginning that they can integrate and use their own rich language resources in their works, in their discussions. I mean, I'll give you one small, simple example. In my global martial arts cinema class, one of my Chinese students was trying to explain to some of her classmates what the jianghu meant. And that's a very, very complex concept in Chinese. And that led to 3 students writing a paper about that. Same thing with a concept called yuan fen. So the students are teaching each other. And I think that's a point that I really want to put out there too. The students, if they are empowered, are bringing in their own rich resources, and suddenly the room is rich and no one is being silenced and everyone is teaching each other. And that will scaffold into assignments. And I think that even that wonderful examples, Sara's example of the little moment where you have a choice, where you can empower a student to dig into that concept, can actually lead to a final paper. So I think that that's really a crucial point. And I wanted to just start off with a question to both of you about the idea that that translanguaging is a verb and strategies. And I know when we spoke earlier, I asked you both to give us homework, to give us some things to think about and to work on, and you shaped your process this way. But I wondered if after hearing our panelists, if you had maybe Sara and Kate, if you had some further suggestions for us.
I think everybody should just listen to Mario and Sara, and they should be blasted out across your entire campus. There's so much richness already going on at FIT that I'm excited that people at your institution get to learn from. Because as Kate was saying when she gave you the recommendations there, one of them was like, how are you at FIT going to extend this work? And it's exciting to see people are already doing that. And yeah, I want to come back and keep learning from you. I'm going to steal probably Mario's Anglicism activity at some point, or remix it in some way if that's okay. Like there's already such richness going on your campus, and to just sort of like respect the process of moving forward with it. Like every semester I add something new and different to my teacher education courses. You know, I also, similar to Kate, had and the one, like the statements that she had, I had something simple about translanguaging, and then that's grown over time as I've learned more, and every semester that statement grows and changes, and I leave little notes for myself in a running document saying, oh, try this next time, or try that next time, inspired by the things that students bring to the table. So really that notion that Sara brought up about it being a process, and taking your time and trying something small, and then sort of building on that, and with the support of your colleagues, would be all I would say. You're on such a great track already.
Thank you. Thank you. And Kate, did you want to respond, or?
Sure. I completely agree with Sara. It was so, it's so heartening to hear of sort of what you're already doing. And I really think, you know, I alluded to this when I was talking, but it's such a unique context to be working with students who are interested in art and design and business, these places that are so global, right, and so transnational. You know, you are really in a unique context where that transnationalism, that global outlook is sort of baked in to the experience. And so I really think that there's so much possibility for thinking about what globalized language looks like, right? And just how unproductive thinking about quote unquote native speakers and standard language is in these worlds, right? That they don't serve us in the worlds of art and design and business. Like that, they just don't. What we have are people who are able to navigate as language users in these spaces. And the idea of measuring up to some standard is much less important than being able to make meaning and communicate your ideas about, say, you know, design. You know, so I think that you're already working with people who have these sensibilities, and it seems a very organic connection to start talking about language that way.
And if I could add one more thing. Sorry. Do you want to go ahead, Mario, and then I'll come back? Okay. I was just going to add one more thing, which is in a lot of the work I do with the computer science education program is we think about language as also going beyond spoken language, beyond written language, and really thinking about multimodal discourse. And I think FIT is perfectly well positioned for that as well, because there are so many media that your students work in and are exposed to, whether that's film, whether that's fashion. Like these are all ways of communicating, and ways that students who maybe who you wouldn't think would be able to communicate with each other then find common ground, and they speak through their art, they speak through their the technology that they create, and so that would be just another thing to keep in mind, that translanguaging is not just about linguistic language, it's about all forms in a semiotic repertoire.
Beautiful. I think Mario, you wanted to say something? Or
I just want to say that, yeah, great. What you, to complement what you, Sara, said. I keep telling the students that, for instance, the vocabulary of clothing, and it has to do with the sociolinguistics of teaching in this case Spanish. And they say, why in English we have so many words, and in Spanish it's, I said, because that reflects history. And one student did one years ago in FIT, a little activity as an extra grade, And I found out through her that it's because England has the industrial revolution. So they have names for every type of pattern, name for every type of garment. And rather Spain inherit that in somehow. So it's just one example. And I said, so if you are not shy to use a corset, being a French word, most of the vocabulary in fashion, also a large amount comes from Italian and French. I said, what's wrong with you? Said, you know, other languages. So you're already doing it. We already, and another aspect that I always try to make them aware, my Spanish speaking students, is listen at home. What is the normative there to speaking? And because I think, and that's a more philosophical question that I ask myself when I'm teaching, is this about prescribing rules or communication? So when a student tell me, Professor, I did the presentation right, I said, if I understood you, it means that you did it right. That you did it perfect according to the normative is different. But you know, anyway, that's just another quick comment on my own experience.
And, you know, so what you're talking about, Mario, makes me think, you know, again, for students who are interested in the worlds of fashion, of design, of art, the idea of doing anything along normative lines, I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? This is not the kind of world that a lot of these students want to be entering into, right? Worlds of square, you know, like that's not, you don't have square students, you know? So I think there's so much possibility, you know, so much excitement. And, you know, even if, to allude to what Sara was saying about, you know, sometimes you make the opportunity and students don't take it up, right? I think that that's certainly something we see in K-12, particularly as someone who works with high school students, right? Not too far off from the students you're teaching. That's a lot of years of deficit ideologies about your language practices. A lot of years of hearing about what you shouldn't do with language, a lot of years of hearing that you're not very good at language, insert whatever language practice, right? And I think, you know, I do think the more space we make for it, the more possibility that it is taken up. But I also think it makes space for students on their own to have space in the process of creation, of writing, of making, opened up to their various language practices, even if the product looks very much like what one would call a monolingual named language piece of work, right? That piece of work will never actually be monolingual because a bilingual person created it, right? Because someone who has access to various linguistic and semiotic resources created it. So I think the more we can sort of open up the process to translanguaging, even if students feel like, you know what, no, I don't want to visibly, right, perform these elements or, you know, audibly perform these elements of my linguistic repertoire, telling students, like in that beautiful example, Sara, of the second example of the writing tutor saying, write it in your home language first, right? That may not even occur to students, right? Or speak it into your phone, right? And then listen to it, and that voice memo you left yourself using whatever language practices you want, that's your first draft, right? So thinking about what parts of this process can be opened up to, you know, much more flexibility linguistically, multimodally, you know, I think the more it gets taken up when we do that. I'm just seeing, yeah, the nonolingual, we hear that so much, non-nons, semilingual. We had some teachers that I worked with a few years ago use the term nilinguis, right? You know, not bilinguis, but nilinguis. And, you know, I mean, we're talking about people who have no problem communicating with their communities outside of the four walls of the classroom. It only becomes a problem in the classroom, right? I love what you said, Mario, about like 8 million people can't be wrong. Or, you know, it's like, you know, these children, these young adults are communicating just fine in their communities. You know, that it only becomes problematized when we hold them up against these rules, right?
one of the issues, I'm sorry, just to say,
Yeah.
not to participate more, but one of the issues, for instance, with the student, we were reading Truman Capote's, one of the short stories of Truman Capote called One State War. It's about a Dominican worker in the 70s, working in Manhattan, cleaning apartments in New York. So I put them to read, and the assignment was you have to translate Truman Capote because he used a lot of, if I remember well, terms in Spanish. But I made them aware that for the first time they are having the power to judge a canonic American literature like Truman Capote and be able how he managed and he captures the, and he does actually, I love Truman Capote, but he captures that lady, Aura, that lady who was married to a Puerto Rican black man who died and all this. And so, you know, in that process, the students sort of revert the process or usually translated from, you know, because they are afraid, oh, the professors are going to find out that I'm translating. I say, no, I welcome them to do that. Go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I wanted to open up for more questions.
I
Go
have a
ahead.
question, if I might.
Great. Yes, thank
Hi,
you.
my name is Taida, and I also teach Spanish with Mario. I guess my question would be, so how do you, how could we say it, practice, I guess, oh my goodness, so hard to say, translanguaging in the class, while also, let's say, being respectful with the with languages that are not English, because I understand, like, you know, I think it's very important how you lay out like the goals of this, no? And how a lot of ways to give power to bilinguals. But then, like you said, you know, it ends up in a one language result. But I understand that what you care about is the process. Now, I'm a bit concerned about that process, because if we're thinking of that, I think she was a K-12 teacher, right, who used Google Translator to communicate with her students. I really wonder how much she understood, because at least with the Spanish, Google Translator does not do a good job, or apps and things like that. And also, or even using body language to understand your students. I mean, I don't know if Mario had the same experience than me, but the body language of a Latinx student is very different from the body language of a non-Latinx student. See, the way they look at you, the way, I mean, you cannot read. I mean, if you are reading from an monolingual world, like the bilingual world, I think it's very hard to. I mean, how do you teach to balance that? No, how there's a lot. It's not just the language. There's a lot you need to know about that language in terms of culture, in terms of religions, in terms of body language. I mean, there's just so much. I just think it worries me that, you know, if we are thinking of a globalized world, no, that we might end up like making out of this a commodity, no, like, and just something that can be translated using an app, and then you just include it in your you know, in whatever the activity it is that you're working on. Again, I understand that the important thing here is the process and to open it up, but I just think it's, you know, it's probably a lot harder than just using Google Translator or translating those instructions. I mean, I couldn't read the instructions in Spanish, for example, very well, but I wonder what the result would be, you know?
Yeah, there's so much there that you're asking about. And I think just you asking the questions is like you're kind of like exercising translanguaging pedagogy, because those are the questions that you need to ask to develop that stance and those design principles. Like, when is a good time to use Google Translate and for what? When is a good time for students to use home language or, you know, their full repertoire? And when is a time to try something new in a new language, right? Those are all decisions that you as the educator are empowered to help your students make. So for instance, we in Kyunghee and I said, Google Translate is a tool, but we also encourage teachers. There's a guide that we had that's called The Languages of New York City, where we talk about, you know, the differences in script and the ways that certain languages go right to left and certain go left to right. And, you know, the sort of histories of different languages, the varieties that might be there. So it's a process of both coping in the moment and then educating yourself deeper and deeper and deeper for the long term. Because Google Translate's not great for everything, but it is good for certain things at certain times. For a teacher like Shireen, who just wants to gain a kind of basic access to a newcomer, that can be a lifeline. But it's going to be garbled, and it's not going to be poetic, and it's not going to be that kind of creative tool. It's limited, and so learning about that is important. And then the second point I wanted to make was about the commodity piece. So Sunil Kanagaraja is an excellent writer on all things translingual, and he has a book all about sort of the commodification of translingualism that you might want to check out, and just the ways that we have to guard ourselves from treating language like a commodity when we kind of use it in our classroom settings. So I recommend that. I'll put it in the chat so you can find the book.
Yeah, I agree very much with what Sara said about this idea of thinking about, you know, everything stemming from a stance, for sure, right? Which is thinking about why we are doing what we're doing, and then the tools we need to do those things, right, become the part of our design. And you have to think about, right, I like the example Sara gave, which is, you know, in a moment of doing collaborative work, what's the word for this? What's the word for this? Like Google Translate could be great for that. Writing a paper, for example, where you are being asked to do it in the language of instruction, Google Translate probably isn't your best tool, right? Mm-hmm. And helping students to figure out what might be better tools. How do you use translanguaging as Google Translate as part of the process, but not the only piece, right? So I think so much of this is what educators who take up a translingual perspective, a translanguaging practice, grapple with. But I think more access, more inclusivity, more flexibility is always good, right? As long as what you are working toward are goals that are also made clear to students.
Thank you. And I think that unfortunately we're running out of, which is very sad. I had a feeling this would happen when we scheduled this, but I wanted to also I suppose if someone wanted to stay and chat a bit longer, they could, but I don't want people to feel uncomfortable having to leave too. So we are officially closing up here. And I wanted to thank everyone and remind you all that we're going to do this again in the fall. And our plan is to invite students also and have a kind of a best practices workshop format for faculty and students. And we already have a lot of students that are very eager to talk about their experiences and what they've done in their assignments. And I just cannot tell you how much we've all learned listening to each other and engaging with this. And I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think it's the beginning of a big wave of change for FIT and collaboration for all of us. So thank you so very much. And I think we'll close here, but if someone wants to stay on and ask a few questions, by all means do so. But thank you again. And remember that this will be available eventually as a recording, and also the slides are available. And the second week of the fall, probably the second week of September is when we're planning on tentatively scheduling our next part of the series. So thank you so much. And I wanted to just point out that Jose Diaz for some reason received the wrong invitation, and he's very sad to not have joined us. So we'll be sure to pin him down next one, and also Isabella. So apologies for that. I was very excited to have him part of the conversation. Thank you so much. And any last words, by all means. I'll turn off my mic so I don't.
Well, we have to acknowledge that, Dean of Liberal Arts supported this event, and also our Chief Diversity Officer's Office also sponsored this event for speakers to come. And then we have a slightly more funding for the September. Yeah, so please come that time, and then you may work that translanguaging policy part for your syllabus in the first semester. I'm definitely including it in my own syllabus, and I can share, what I, come with. If you want to linger, I mean, we can, chat a little bit more, but speakers, I know, your time is precious, so.
I want to thank, yes, I want to point out to everyone that Patrick received a request for funding one day before the deadline and said yes. So thank you again for that. Yeah, he really saved the day for us. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Such a pleasure to be here with you.